Hey everyone, and welcome to the show. Imagine this living in a time when just going to a Catholic mass could get you arrested or even worse, tortured or executed.
It really highlights the just upheaval of that time and the lengths people would go to either protect or suppress faith.
Yeah, it's intense. And that's exactly what we're diving into today with Martin R. Beardsley's book, The Women Who Saved Catholic England.
Oh, cool.
It's a really interesting read. It's almost like a historical thriller, you know, filled with secret networks and safe houses and coded messages and all of these insanely high stakes.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is this concept of the Catholic resistance, as Beardsley calls it, is that it's primarily defensive.
Hmm.
Unlike a lot of other resistance movements, their goal wasn't to overthrow the government or launch attacks. It
Yeah.
was about protecting their faith and protecting their priests and their way of life.
And doing all of this, knowing that anyone, even their own servants or children, could betray them. I
Oh,
mean, the authorities used any means necessary to pressure those who harbored priests.
yeah, it really created this atmosphere of constant fear and suspicion, and you never knew who to trust. So it must have been incredibly difficult to live with day in and day out.
To really understand their struggle,
Mhm.
I think it's helpful to take a step back and look at the historical context.
Yeah.
So, England's shift from Catholicism to Protestantism, that kind of started with Henry VIII, but really escalated under Elizabeth I, right?
Yeah, well, Henry VIII's break from Rome was more about power than doctrine. I mean, he still considered himself Catholic,
Yeah.
but his actions laid the groundwork for a more radical shift towards Protestantism under Elizabeth I. And she saw Catholicism as a direct threat to her authority, so she cracked down hard on anyone that remained loyal to the old faith.
So even something as simple as just attending a Catholic mass could get you in really serious
Oh,
trouble.
absolutely. You could face fines or imprisonment or even in some cases death.
Yeah.
And Beardsley uses the stories of two remarkable women, Margaret Clitherow and Vaux, to really illustrate this point. And they came from completely different backgrounds, but both risked everything for their faith. And their stories are a powerful reminder of how class and status really played a role in their fates.
So let's start with Margaret Clitherow. She was known as the Pearl of York. This woman was a wife, a mother, and a pillar of her community. And what's so striking is just her unwavering faith, even in the face of so much danger.
Yeah, she was deeply devout and believed that it was her duty to shelter priests, and she opened her home to them, providing them with a safe haven despite the risks.
It's just incredible to think about the courage that must have taken. Her husband, John, wasn't Catholic, but he clearly loved and supported her. But their story takes a tragic turn when Margaret is arrested for her actions.
And it's during her trial that she makes this decision that still sparks debate today. She refuses to enter a plea.
Oh, wow. Why would she do that?
By refusing to plead, Margaret chose peine forte et dure, which is being crushed to death.
Oh, my gosh.
It was a brutal method of execution, but she believed that by doing so, she would prevent her children and servants from being forced to testify against her.
Wow. So she saw this as a way to protect her family, even in death.
Right. Many view it as this ultimate act of self-sacrifice and love and faith. However, others argue that by choosing this path, she actually put her family in more danger. It's a complex moral dilemma with no easy answers.
It really is. It makes you think about the impossible choices that people faced during those times. So her execution itself was particularly gruesome.
Oh, it was horrific.
Right.
Margaret was laid on the ground with a heavy door placed on top of her, and then they piled hundreds of pounds of rocks on top of the door, slowly crushing her to death.
Wow. That's just unimaginable. All because she wanted to practice her faith and protect those who shared her beliefs.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder of the brutality of that era, but even today, you can actually visit the spot on Ouse Bridge in York where Margaret was executed, and there's even a relic of her hand that's displayed at the Bar Convent.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a testament to her enduring legacy as a symbol of Catholic resistance.
Wow, that's incredible. But let's move on to another fascinating figure from the book, Anne Vaux. Her background was quite different from Margaret Clitherow's, right?
Oh, yeah, completely different. Anne came from a very noble family with connections to some of the most influential Catholics in England. She used her wealth, her status, and her connections to protect priests and provide resources for this Catholic underground. And one of the priests that she was particularly close to was a Jesuit named Henry Garnet.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Beardsley describes this really dramatic raid on Anne Vaux's home that sounds like it's straight out of a movie. Can you tell us about that?
So these priest hunters, called pursuivants, burst into her home, threatening to tear the place apart. But Anne was really quick-witted, and she knew how to use her social standing to her advantage. She skillfully delayed them, questioning their authority and arguing with them, which bought precious time for Garnet and others to hide.
Wait, so they were actually in the house when the raid happened?
This is where the ingenuity of this man, Nicholas Owen, who is also known as Little John, comes into play. He was this master craftsman who built these incredible hiding places called priest holes into the structure of these houses. And they were so cleverly concealed that even the most thorough searches often came up empty.
So these weren't like just holes dug in the ground or something?
No. Some were very elaborate with ventilation systems and food storage and even access to nearby rooms for supplies. They were essential to the survival of many priests during that time.
It's amazing how resourceful they were. So it seems like Anne Vaux's social standing provided her with this level of protection that Margaret Clitherow didn't have.
Yeah, it's true. While someone like Margaret, who was middle class, faced immediate and harsh punishment, the authorities were much more hesitant to arrest or execute someone of Anne's status, at least for a while.
It's fascinating how these two women from such different backgrounds were united by their faith and this commitment to protecting it. But I understand there were many other women involved in the Catholic resistance.
Oh yeah, there were many others. Beardsley introduces us to a whole cast of remarkable women, like Dorothy Vavasour, who was a noblewoman imprisoned for her faith, and she endured the tragic loss of her husband while he was also imprisoned. And Anne Lyne, who ran a safe house for priests and was eventually executed for her dedication. These are just a few examples of the countless women who risked everything to keep their faith alive.
Their courage and resilience in the face of all that adversity is really inspiring.
It really is. Their stories remind us that even in the darkest of times, individuals can make a difference, and their struggle for religious freedom has echoes even today. It also serves as a reminder that tolerance is fragile. And it's so important to safeguard religious freedom for everyone. But the story takes a very dramatic turn with the Gunpowder Plot of 1605.
Right.
And this event really casts a long shadow over the lives of these women and the entire Catholic community in England.
The Gunpowder Plot, that was the attempt to blow up Parliament and assassinate King James I. And the main figure behind it was Robert Catesby. And of course, there's the infamous Guy Fawkes, who was caught guarding the explosives.
Exactly. And here's where the connections get really interesting. Anne Vaux's brother, William, was actually married to Catesby's sister.
Oh.
So you can see how these families were very much intertwined. And while there's no evidence that Anne was directly involved in the plot itself, her connection to the conspirators put her under intense scrutiny.
So even if she wasn't part of it, she was still caught in the crossfire.
Absolutely. And then there's the mysterious Monteagle letter. This letter warned Lord Monteagle, a Catholic sympathizer, about the plot. And it's still debated who wrote it, but some historians believe that Anne Vaux might have been involved.
So she might have tried to warn someone without directly exposing the plotters. That's a tough spot to be in.
It is. Think about it. If she knew about the plot and didn't report it, she would be complicit in treason. But on the other hand, betraying those that she had sworn to protect would violate her conscience and her faith. Right. A terrible dilemma. It must have been a really challenging time to be Catholic in England. So what happened after the plot was discovered and they caught the conspirators?
Well, the country basically descended into chaos. There was this widespread panic and a crackdown on anyone even suspected of being involved with the plotters.
Mm-hmm.
And Anne Vaux, along with Henry Garnet and others, they had to flee for their lives.
Yeah. You can imagine the fear and the uncertainty.
Of course. And the fact that they went into hiding just made them look even more guilty in the eyes of the authorities.
Yeah.
They eventually sought refuge at Hinlop Hall. It was this grand house in Worcestershire owned by a Catholic family, the Haddingtons. And this house was famous for its elaborate priest holes, expertly crafted by our friend Little John Nicholas Owen.
And this is where we get another dramatic showdown between the priest hunters and those hiding the priests.
Exactly. The pursuivants were the ones who were tasked with hunting down priests, tracked them to Hinlop Hall. And what followed was this meticulous and intense search. These pursuivants were relentless in their efforts to uncover any hidden Catholics. But Little John was a master at his craft.
He was. He had concealed Garnet and another priest, Edward Oldcorn, in this priest hole that was so well hidden, the pursuivants searched for days without finding them.
Days? How could they survive in there that long?
Well, it's a testament to Little John's skill. This particular priest hole was actually connected to another room by a hollow reed.
Wow.
So they were able to receive food and drink and even messages through this small passageway.
That's incredible. It's amazing they were able to stay hidden for so long.
Yeah.
But they couldn't evade capture forever, could they?
Sadly, no. After 9 days, hunger and exhaustion forced Garnet and Oldcorn to come out of hiding. And some historians believe that Anne Vaux, who was also hiding at Hindlip Hall, might have actually persuaded them to surrender to prevent further suffering and to protect the Habington family who owned the house.
It seems like even in that moment of defeat, she was putting the welfare of others before her own.
It does seem to be a defining characteristic of Anne Vaux. And Garnet was then taken to London and imprisoned in the Tower of London. And despite enduring harsh interrogations and possibly even torture, he never implicated Anne Vaux or any of the other women who risked so much to protect him.
His silence says a lot about his character and the bond of trust they shared. So what became of Anne Vaux after this?
She continued to defy the authorities. She even visited Garnet in prison and sent him secret messages. The gunpowder plot really had a profound impact on her life, as it did for many Catholics in England at that time.
Yeah, it feels like that plot really changed everything. So what can we learn from the stories of these courageous women, especially given the events surrounding the gunpowder plot?
I think their stories remind us that faith and courage often go hand in hand. These women were deeply committed to their beliefs and were willing to face incredible danger to protect them.
It also highlights just how dangerous religious intolerance can be and how important open dialogue and understanding between different faiths is.
Yeah, I agree. The legacy of these women is complex and it's intertwined with the political and social upheaval of their time. I think it reminds us that history is rarely black and white, and that even those we consider heroes can make difficult choices.
Right. It encourages us to approach history with more nuance and empathy, seeking to understand the complexities of the past rather than judging it through a modern lens. But before we delve deeper into the aftermath of the gunpowder plot and the lives of these incredible women, we need to take a quick break. We'll be right back to continue our deep dive into the women who saved Catholic England. Okay, we are back and ready to jump back into the lives of these incredible women. So the gunpowder plot obviously had a huge impact on the Catholic community there in England.
Yeah.
What happened to them in the aftermath of this rebellion?
Well, the persecution of Catholics did continue, but the intensity did eventually lessen over time. However, for those directly connected to the plotters, life remained very difficult. And Anne Vaux's family in particular continued to face hardship.
So it seems like even if you weren't directly involved, simply being associated with those who were could still land you in trouble.
Oh, absolutely. Guilt by association was a very powerful thing during those times. Anne Vaux's sister-in-law, Eliza Vaux, was imprisoned, and Eliza's son, Edward, who was the fourth Lord Vaux, was also caught in the net of suspicion.
It's amazing how Anne Vaux managed to navigate such treacherous waters. You know, we've talked about her piety and her courage, but she also seemed to possess this incredible resilience and fighting spirit.
Yes, she was definitely a force to be reckoned with. Beardsley highlights an interesting anecdote about how Anne actually sued Lady Tresham, who was the mother of one of the gunpowder plot conspirators, over a financial dispute.
Wow, so even in the midst of all this political and religious turmoil, she was still fighting for what she believed in.
Exactly. She was a very complex and compelling figure, this blend of piety and pragmatism and this unwavering loyalty to her faith and her loved ones.
It makes you wonder what really motivated her. Was it purely religious conviction, or were there other factors at play?
That's a question that historians continue to debate. Some argue that for many women in that era, involvement in the Catholic resistance was as much about social networks and family ties as it was about religious zeal.
Right, so human motivations are rarely simple or straightforward.
Exactly. We have to consider the historical context and try to avoid imposing our modern interpretations on the past. But regardless of her motivations, there's no denying Anne Vaux's bravery. What's remarkable is that she continued to support the Catholic cause long after the gunpowder plot, despite the ongoing persecution. She even helped to establish a Jesuit college in Ghent, Belgium.
Wow, so she dedicated her life to ensuring the survival of Catholicism in England. What about her sister Eleanor? Did she stay involved as well?
Yeah, both Anne and Eleanor continued to harbor priests, even as the risks remained high. Beardsley mentions that they lived together for a time in Leicestershire, along with a Jesuit priest named William Wright. Their commitment to protecting their faith and those who served it never wavered.
Amazing. It's a true testament to their dedication. But they couldn't live in that constant state of fear forever. Did things ever get better for Catholics in England?
Well, it was a very gradual process. There were periods of relative tolerance followed by renewed crackdowns, but over time, attitudes toward Catholics did begin to shift, and eventually laws were passed to ease the restrictions placed on them.
So the sacrifices that these women made and countless others who fought for religious freedom ultimately paved the way for greater tolerance and understanding.
Absolutely. Their unwavering faith and courage, even when facing danger and persecution, helped to ensure the survival of Catholicism in England. And they really laid the groundwork for the religious freedoms that we enjoy today.
It's a powerful and inspiring story. It makes you reflect on the importance of faith, courage, and resilience, not just in the context of religious freedom, but in any fight for justice and equality.
Yeah, and their story also highlights how seemingly ordinary individuals can make such an extraordinary impact on the world. These women weren't political leaders or military figures. They were mothers, wives, sisters, daughters who just found themselves caught in this incredibly tumultuous period of history, and yet their actions helped to shape the course of religious freedom in England.
What a legacy to leave behind. It's a reminder that each of us has the potential to make a difference, even when facing seemingly insurmountable challenges.
Hmm.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the women who saved Catholic England. It's been a fascinating journey filled with intrigue and danger, and these inspiring stories of courage and resilience. What stood out to you the most? What resonated with you on a personal level? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below, share this episode with your friends, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future deep dives into captivating books and ideas. As you go about your day, we'll leave you with this thought. How can we honor the legacy of those who fought for religious freedom? How can we embody that same spirit of courage and compassion in our own lives?